Oh, okay. Sorry. We just had a little technical problem there. We've resolved that. Um, and SDI is not just about the data. It is not just about portals. It's about everything. It's the policies, the governance issues, legislation. It's all the elements that go up to make up a national SDI, an NSDI. So it's something that many people simply think once they've implemented a web portal for their geospatial data, they have an SDI. That actually is not the case. That's just one component of the SDI. So really the main objective is to increase data sharing, to try to harmonize government data across all departments, make it more interoperable, reduce duplicated effort in collecting data, allow people to reuse the data if the legislation permits, hopefully reduce the cost of collecting and using geospatial data. But data sharing has a cost, as we'll see when we get to the open data presentation. Nothing in life is free. It takes time and people and money to collect and use data. At some point, someone has to pay for this. So what we're looking at is increasing the value of geospatial information for all levels of society. And the studies most recently done, first studies on the economic benefits were done back as far as 1991, 92, 93, all showing that SDIs were very cost effective with very good payback figures. And the more recent studies done in the last 3 years confirm that. So it's something we should take for granted now, that if we can harmonize the data, make it more operable, we will end up with a more efficient society. And some SDIs start from the bottom up. We'll see that in a moment when we look at one of the marine SDIs that started in Canada. But basically top down is necessary to make sure we have enough direction in place. You need a government champion, you need legislation, etc. The main components are governance, data policies, legislation, implementation, and then capacity building to make sure that all the stakeholders on the SDI know how to use it. And the key component at the bottom is people. If you don't have people engaged in the process, who believe in the process and who have the capacity to work in the process, it will take that much longer to implement these activities. So the main key data policies are access to data. This has to do with intellectual property rights, data protection, privacy laws. Is the data open by default or by regulation? The ability to use and then reuse the data, especially by third parties, and whether one charges for the government data or not. It's not a common it's not a common feature across the whole world that open data is available for free for everyone. Even in governments that have most of their data openly available, there is still some data that is usually available only for paying a fee, regardless of whether that's a large fee or not. Other key policy issues are custodianship. It's understanding what you have to do to maintain your data as the custodian of main databases across a whole range of themes. The problem is spatial data appears everywhere. Virtually every theme you can think of has some sort of location-based information component. So we're trying to cover a very wide range of data themes when we talk about spatial data infrastructure. Whether you participate voluntarily because it's a good thing to do or because of law for which there are enforcement issues depends on how the national SDI strategy has been formulated. And then the key also is on the financial support. Are you going to get enough money to actually implement this? The main challenges. We talk about the big four: consultation, cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. These all take experience and time and resources. Raising awareness of the benefits is key at the beginning of an initiative, and then later examining the benefits that you're achieving as the SDI is implemented. Trying to overcome skill shortages. I won't say what country it is, but next week I'm running a 2-day training course on how to implement Inspire in a European state, and we've had the Inspire directive since 2007. It takes a long time to keep maintaining the skills levels for people to implement their SDIs. We need to convince the stakeholders that harmonized geospatial data has a value, even knowing that they may end up as custodians doing more work to do the harmonization in the first place. Another key issue is managing expectations. We've had cases where people contacted us thinking they were going to put their SDI in place in 6 months to 3 years. And then we pointed out that in Europe, we've been working at it for about 20 years now. Information infrastructures take a long time to implement. And you must keep people aware of the fact that so many parts of the society have to cooperate on this, not just the governments, that it's something that we need to keep in mind. This isn't going to happen tomorrow. Then you need performance indicators to prove to the people providing the funding that this is actually something to do, and be ready to adapt to change, because the world doesn't stand still. When we started the European, pan-European SDI initiatives in 1995, that was, 21 years ago now, the whole world was a different place technologically than it is today. So the main challenges that exist are capacity building, and this is where continual training is required. We have conflicts amongst government departments. I've seen this in several countries where I've done SDI consulting work at government level. It's who's going to be in charge? And then the next question is usually, are we going to charge for the government data or not? We have this issue of lack of incentives. Someone is already fully employed doing their job in a GIS capacity typically, and you're now asking them to do something more for the data harmonization and interoperability aspect of an SDI, which is key to the SDI, and how do you incentivize these people? There's always been concern over data quality. The minute you make data available to a wider audience, someone says, I'm worried that they might see that my data is not the best in the world. I guess if they realize that everyone has the same fear, they might fear this less. Data hoarding and data silos, people who have expertise in one type of data, we need to be able to expand that expertise to other sectors of society who could also use that data. And then there is simply institutional inertia. We've always done it this way, and we find it very difficult to change. So what are the SDI challenges facing the marine community? The first one is just the number of types of data, huge number of themes bundled into one thing called, for example, the coastal zone, which you don't find when you're working perhaps just with agriculture or just with transport. The coastal marine area is one of the most complex, we call it a complex information territory to work in, because there is just so much data across so many sectors, so many disciplines, and yet somehow we have to try to make it work. Secondly is the legal basis. I use two examples here, one from the EU on their maritime policy and one from the US. In both cases, there is nothing in law, inherently in law, that says this is how you must do your SDI, your coastal or marine SDI. Quite often it's up to the stakeholders themselves to band together, for example, the Council of Counties in America or the Council of Coastal States, so that they actually do some activity that relates to their specific theme. This again becomes more difficult when you have so many different sectors involved in a theme. Standardization and conformance testing. This is an outtake from the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive in the EU. It's typical of the sort of legislation we see, not just in the EU, but around the world. It's basically saying that the member states should organize the use of the best available data, and they should decide how to organize the sharing of the information for maritime spatial plans. It doesn't say how they should do it. It says that they should decide. It covers marine physical data. At the bottom there, number 3, it says they are to be using relevant policies such as INSPIRE. So this is one way that in Europe, the INSPIRE directive, which covers the pan-European SDI, is being quoted in lots of other legal instruments now, saying you will use harmonized interoperable data according to the INSPIRE directive to take over this other role on monitoring and reporting. On the marine data challenges, I brought this up from the Marine GDI in Canada from several years ago, showing where marine cadastre is involved. Marine cadastre is one of the areas that has seen a lot of work in a few countries, going back more than 20 years now, partly driven by the offshore exploration industry, where marine boundaries became very important. It's something that we're still focusing on now, and marine cadastre has become a big issue in Europe only within the last maybe 2 or 3 years. So the marine spatial data infrastructure is that element of an SDI. This is a national SDI that focuses on the marine input to those SDIs, covering not just the data, but the governance, the standards, and the ICT. This is a quote taken from the Marine Dimension Guidance for Hydrographic Offices from the International Hydrographic Organization, who about 7 years ago decided to start focusing on marine spatial data infrastructure and moving away from looking at marine data that they were collecting just for charting purposes. They used to use the S57 standard, which still is the IHO global standard. It's used mainly for producing charts, hydrographic charts, and feeding into electronic navigation systems. What we have today is the new S100 framework, which has been promoted. This is a framework not of a specific standard, but a standard framework that's being used to create other standards under that framework. The key being that this new framework, this new harmonization activity will help support collection and custodianship of marine data from the hydrographic organizations that can be used much more widely than just for navigation purposes. The first one that they're working on, or the first few, are electronic navigation charts, nautical publications, and I think high-density bathymetry. So individual standards are being developed under this framework in that area. So the biggest challenge in marine spatial planning, it requires a lot of data of many different types from many different custodians, many different disciplines, and trying to get this to work together on an ad hoc basis or on a volunteer basis hasn't been working that well, which is why we do have marine spatial planning units and new legislation being created now. The complexity is this last issue here, the land-sea interaction. There is been very little attention placed at linking up land-based data, topographic data at the coastline with hydrographic data at the coastline. We've called it here in Europe for many years the white ribbon. It's the ribbon of data that has no data. And there are initiatives taking place now to try to do something in the coastal area. So our main recommendations on your marine and coastal SDI is tie it into your e-government initiatives. These are the overriding initiatives of the government. These are the ones that your data, if it's government data, have to respond to anyway. Set some reasonable timelines, achievable timelines for the implementation, and do the actions in parallel where they can be done. For example, metadata can be created having identified your data assets, your data resources, while other activities are taking place, for example, relating to licensing policy or other harmonization aspects. Try to find some early win-win scenarios. Nothing convinces a financial backer, whether it's your Treasury Department or it's a single government department, better than if we do this, we win both ways. I don't know why I keep doing that. And then look at your implementation strategies. It's no point in coming up with a strategy that's going to require a budget far in excess of what you have or using human resources that you don't have. You need to come up with a strategy that faces reality within the organization and within the government. And then provide for continuous awareness raising, continuous training, and other capacity building activities. People change jobs. People retire. SDIs take years to implement. The training and capacity building never stops. So what is a marine coastal SDI? It's a subset of a national information infrastructure. It's a subset of a national spatial data infrastructure. It focuses on a wide range of themes, which makes it more difficult to implement. And it's a key people question. Who is going to be the leader across all these different sectors, many government departments? Who is actually going to take the lead on doing the marine coastal aspect of the national SDI? So that was the end of part one. I'd like to turn over to Jade now, who's going to present some research we started, that she started in 2014, looking into marine geoportals, the different types of portals, and the characteristics. So over to Jade.
Thanks, Roger. Good afternoon, everyone. This part of the webinar deals with the worldwide developments of the National Coastal and Marine SDI's geoportal. Marine and coastal areas are complex and fragile territories. As you probably know, marine and coastal areas are in crisis all over the world through overexploitation and related use conflicts. As mentioned by Roger earlier, several concepts and related regulations, such as the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, provide a promising context for increasing efficiency in spatial data production and improving availability and accessibility. Within this context, the needs for coastal and marine SDIs are becoming a priori evident to inform decision-making. But what are the current development of these coastal and marine SDIs? In order to answer this question, we have conducted an international web survey to assess the worldwide developments of existing national marine and coastal geoportals, of SDIs or similar web services. The geoportal is the central web gateway for spatial data discovery, access, and related added value services. For us, the geoportal is a way to assess what processes a country implements in order to enable the access and use of spatial data. The methodology of this research is based on two successive steps. First, creating the geoportals inventory with the help of specific keywords. And second, measuring 11 characteristics to describe each geoportal. The characteristics were sourced from the geoportal web pages in order to describe the 5 components of GSDIs: data, technology, people, policy, and standards. The second phase was conducted every 6 months since November 2014 to March of this year in order to monitor the current developments. Here is the list of the 12 characteristics that we will discuss in more details later. 51 operational national geoportals are included in our survey. These geoportals are implemented by 27 countries, and most of them were implemented around the mid-2000s. The large majority of the countries have 1 or 2 geoportals, and the major maritime countries, such as USA, France, Australia, and Canada, manage from 4 to 5 geoportals. And there are very few geoportals in Africa, for example. The analyzed geoportals provide various digital data within diverse domains, including administration, physical aspects, biological aspects, and human aspects. So these geoportals are very diverse. So the combination of the characteristics about data thematic, data access policy, search data mechanism, and access data mechanism enables us to suggest a typology resulting into the following 4 types of geoportal. Oceanographic data center geoportals in blue, atlas-like geoportals in yellow, hydrographic office geoportals in red, and hybrid geoportals sharing the characteristic of the 3 other types. At first, these 4 types can be broadly described by their affiliation. The atlas-like geoportals are related to the ICANN, International Coastal Atlas Network. The hydrographic offices are related to the International Hydrographic Organization, IHO, and the oceanographic data centers have been implemented by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. In the next slides, we present some of the results regarding the online measurements of the characteristics. Regarding level of openness, most of the geoportals provide free access for all. The remaining geoportals provide free access only for registered user and free access granted by using a request form. This is the case for most of the oceanographic data center geoportal in blue. And there is also paid access for most of the hydrographic office geoportals in red. Regarding licensing, the data policy depends on the type of the geoportal. The Atlas-like ones provide data under an open license or specific data use agreement. The data of the hydrographic geoportals are under the general conditions of sale of the retail source, and the data policy of the oceanographic data center geoportals is compliant with the IOC policy. Regarding search mechanism, searching for data, spatial data on a geoportal can be done through different mechanisms. A catalog interface that allows searching by means of keywords, data areas, providers, etc., a map interface for locating an area of interest, and a list of products in hypertext. Most geoportals combine several of these. The map interface is the most common mechanism, except for the hydrographic office geoportals in red here, whose data are mainly accessible via a list of products in hypertext. Access of the data over the geoportals can be performed in different ways. Downloading services, other web services, access services, data transmission via email, or data purchase from unofficial retail sources. Once again, most of the geoportals combine several mechanisms. Downloading services are the most common one, except for the hydrographic office geoportals which use retail source. Regarding the application of the metadata standards in the geoportal, all the hydrographic office geoportals provide metadata according to the IHO transfer standard known as the S57, and the remaining geoportals provide metadata in the Inspire metadata standard. The result of this research enabled us to identify some good practices. Here are few of them. Regarding the data component, a wide range of marine and coastal data is relevant to characterize these territories and the land-sea continuum. Regarding policy, free access for registered users gives the geoportal managers insights in the users and their data requirements. Open license such as, sorry for that. Regarding the open licenses such as open database license, allowing users to freely share, modify and use this database while maintaining this same freedom for others. The third component is people. Key indicators in the website give general insights about the geoportal. In addition, help desk, tutorials and mechanisms allowing comments and feedback are relevant to help the user. And finally, the two last components, technology. Searching for spatial data on a geoportal can be done through different mechanisms, but catalog interface that allows searching by means of keywords and map interface for locating an area of interest seems the most relevant for users. Regarding search mechanism, regarding access mechanism, downloading services and other web services allow the user to download and to have access and to have direct access to the geographic data. In addition, it is also interesting to mention functionalities supporting decision making. There are, for example, online mapping tools helping in understanding marine and coastal issues, or interactiveness functionalities, for example, online forum, blog, enable interaction among marine and coastal users. For the users who would like to publish their data, there is also a mechanism proposing to submit the metadata and the datasets. And finally, regarding standards, it is relevant to apply international standards, in particular standards that the national SDI implement. And finally, as a conclusion, our results suggest that worldwide developments are underway for coastal and marine geoportals. However, despite the integrated approach promoted by maritime spatial planning concepts, the results indicate that well-operating geoportals with access to a wide range of data are not commonly found. Through data organization and services, interoperability need to be improved. It's also important to raise awareness of coastal information needs with the territorial geospatial community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. I think what we'll do now is look at the coastal and marine SDIs that exist in 3 countries, the ones who have started earliest on this and who have advanced the most, just so you get an idea of what is possible. The first that we're looking at is the Australian system. If my computer would stop doing that. It started off as something other than AMSIS, which is what it now is, the Australian Marine Spatial Information System, that collected a lot of legacy data. It mainly looks at elevation and depth information. Australia was also very big on bathymetry and offshore marine cadastre, one of the drivers being the minerals industry, the offshore minerals and exploration industry. The data today underpins many different applications, and you'll see this again, where it brings in the whole multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary aspect of coastal and marine data. It started basically as a bottom-up activity, focusing on the marine information, not necessarily as an integrated part of the Australian SDI as it was being developed at that time. The current AMSIS, the Australian Marine Spatial Information System as it exists today, is an interactive mapping system. It has just decision support tools, has many different layers of information in it. The data is coming from Geoscience Australia, who are now the leaders of the various of the national SDI initiatives. We're going to have a quick look at their website in a minute. I won't click on the offshore minerals map simply to state that offshore minerals exploration is typically one of the first drivers for getting into marine cadastre and offshore information. One of the caveats you find on the AMSIS system is that the information should not be relied upon as the sole source of information for commercial and operational decisions, and it should not be used for navigational purposes. In other words, there's so many different types of data in here. This is not official hydrographic office data from the Australian Hydrographic Service for navigation. The legacy data in AMSIS goes back from 26 to 2014, and I will not click on the web services link, which is here. It's in the presentation when you go to it, but this is the sort of information that this leads to on their main web services page. There's access to all of the different legacy data that was there for a number of years, information on legislation, on marine boundaries, the Submerged Lands Acts, a lot of legislative information, and quite a lot of fisheries-related information. Again, the fisheries, offshore fisheries, is one of the second drivers for marine SDI. Probably one of the most advanced SDI, coastal SDIs in the world is from the U.S. Work on this started way back in 1999 through what was then the Coastal Services Center of NOAA. They produced guideline documents, produced their own training activities from the Federal Geographic Data Committee, FGDC metadata standards back in 1998, and there is still today an FGDC Marine and Coastal Spatial Data Subcommittee. So this is officially recognized within the NSDI, since the FGDC is the main driver for the SDI in the U.S. The online system is called Digital Coast. It's one of the most heavily used marine coastal resources in the U.S. for the U.S. community. The website is here. I will see if I can click off to the contributing partners page without completely disrupting this presentation. Hold one's breath. And there it is. The reason I did this, oh, sorry, I'm afraid you're not seeing it. Oh, great. Because I'm also looking at one of our user screens as well. Let me close that. Sorry about this, folks. We tried it earlier and it seemed to work. So we'll go back. I'll ask you to go visit the website shown here, the contributing partners, simply because you'll see the number of stakeholders who are actively involved in. Are you seeing this? Yeah. It's actively involved in the coastal digital coast. This involves industry, research institutes, government agencies, state agencies, counties, even cities. There are 450 stakeholders providing data to and working with data in the digital coast. This is one of the reasons that it is so successful. It's not showing. Right. Sorry about that. This is the first time we've used this system. We'll get better with practice. When you go to the Digital Coast website, you'll see lots of different activities that you can log on to, lots of information, data products, return on investment report, which is important for your financing, and again, go and have a look at the contributing partners to get a feel for the wide range of people who are involved in the activity. The reason I bring up the Canadian Marine GDI is that, again, like the U.S. system, the Marine Geospatial Data Infrastructure published its first reports beginning back in 1999, before we were hearing too much about the Canadian GDI. It was certainly being done with heavy contribution from the government departments, and you'll notice that the first published guidelines for the Canadian NSDI, which is now called the GeoConnections, back then it was CGDI, came out in 2004. But we were seeing quite detailed reports on the marine spatial side as early as 2001. The interesting note from this, for those, when I talk about managing expectations, is that this is from 15 years ago. Capacity building will be needed to create demand for MGDI and to create the capacity to use it to the fullest. And this is still one of the key challenges that remains today, is having enough capacity there, not just on data providers, but also on other people who want to use that information to know how to do it. So if you go to the GeoConnections website, this is the main provider of SDI information in Canada. They have a web map services running under the Marine Geosciences Data Portal. We won't try to go to them again because it may not work. The other activity taking place on the East Coast is the Coastal and Ocean Information Network Atlantic, COIN Atlantic. This has been very active, covering mainly the Atlantic provinces of Canada, and it has its own website with lots of activities. You have your own search utilities, you've got a geo-content generator, a data accessibility self-assessment tool, which is one of the tools that's in your download panel for handouts. Typical applications are things like developing a coastal characterization service for the island of Newfoundland. You can click off of the different search tools and even geo-content generators, because one of the keys is to make it easier for people to actually put data into the system. And finally, what I'm looking at, this is not a specific marine coastal SDI, it's the Irish Spatial Data Exchange, which is one of the main windows for the Irish SDI. The point is, most of the initial work, or a lot of the initial work on the ISDE, was driven by the Marine Institute, the Geological Survey of Ireland, and the Coastal Marine Research Centre at the University College Cork. The marine activity, because again, Ireland is an island nation, and offshore issues, both minerals and energy production, fisheries were very important for them. So, what are some good practices and what have we learned so far? First of all, for marine or coastal SDI, this has to take place within the national SDI. It can't be done in isolation, and that has to be done also within the national information infrastructure. which essentially overrides NSDI. In other words, you need to be involved with your e-government activities almost from the beginning. I've seen too many cases where parallel developments have taken place, which have then wasted 1 to 2 years while they try to harmonize the information that was produced under 2 different sets of principles. It's imperative to have a key organization or some sort of formal consortium, a council in place who can look after these issues with some level of funding. And of course, putting that organization together, again, this comes from personal consulting experience, it requires compromise, cooperation, and collaboration. It's infighting between government agencies as to who should be lead, if it's not an obvious lead, can actually lead to tremendous delays. Always try to adopt international standards or the national profiles that have been developed within your e-government or NII initiatives, typically based on ISO, and be ready to change. As we said, nothing stands still. The technology we have available today, even the standards, the specifications from the Open Geospatial Consortium, everything changes too often to pretend that you don't have to care. I'd like to pass over to Professor Kromfutz now to take you through a presentation on open data, because again, when you're dealing with so many different sectors, so many different types of information, open data becomes really critical. Yep.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Jade. Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to present the issues related to open data. So, during my short presentation, I think 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I would like to answer the following questions. Why open data? What is open geodata? Are there examples of applications based on open geodata? Then also a question about what are the benefits of open geodata? And last but not least, how to boost the value-added use of open data. Each of these questions I briefly try to answer. So, why open data for the coastal marine community? And I try to answer this question by means of a project called Erosion. It was a project running from 2000 to 2002, and it was a European Union project. And the main object of this project, Erosion, was the following: to provide the European Commission with a package of recommendations on the policy and management measures to address coastal measures. And also, it also provides the recommendations should be based on a thorough assessment of the coastline. So that was the objective of this project, to do a thorough assessment of the entire coastline in the European Union. It sounds easy, it wasn't the case. It was a nightmare. I would like to give you an example. This is a beautiful island in the Mediterranean called Corsica. And let's zoom in to a beautiful bay, the Bay of Ajaccio. And what we would like to do in this project, Erosion, we would like to allocate where are the highly vulnerable areas located in terms of lives, economy, and nature. Where are the moderately vulnerable areas and low vulnerable areas? And based on this information, we have to provide recommendations on policy and measurement measures to address coastal erosion, so that we can really pinpoint which are the areas that need attention in regards to coastal erosion. The first was already at that time, we had to define a definition, a proper definition, a commonly shared definition of a coastline. It sounds easy, it wasn't the case in Europe. But in terms, what we would like to do is, we needed a lot of information to collect, to analyze, to do some analysis with, in order to allocate those areas which are vulnerable to coastal erosion. We had data, we needed data actually, about elevation, about bathymetry, about administrative boundaries, about hydrography, about infrastructure, erosion patterns, sediment discharges from rivers, hydrodynamic and sea level rise data, land cover and land cover changes, laws and decrees. So we needed a lot of data in order to do some proper analysis that at the end resulted in a beautiful map on where the areas are located which are vulnerable to coastal erosion in terms of lives at risk, economy at risk, and nature at risk. But, and that's the main point why I would like to show you this example of erosion, is because we are really also encountered issues related to cost and access restrictions. If we would have at that time an open data policy, we could have done everything much more efficient, much quicker, and also at the end we would know what would be the quality that we would achieve, and we would not have had dissemination constraints. Because at that time, in 2000, when we would like to have data about elevation, we had a lot of data, and particular elevation data were protected. And you cannot, and that means you could not buy the data, but just a right to use it, a license. And at that time there were strict conditions. And as I already said, each country has its own licenses, and that was quite inconvenient to arrange. In particular, when you think about a project as this, in which we have to work in a cross-national level. Dissemination of end products is restricted. Sometimes even end products have to be degraded. So we would like to have a better product. We had actually a better product, but because we were forced, because of these license conditions, to degrade our end product. For example, we could not visualize the end product on a very high cartographic scale level. We were forced to present our result on a lower scale level. Also, we at that time, because we did a lot of transformations, and you saw we have a lot of sources with different formats, we had to do a lot of transformations. So at the end even, we were not sure how certain was our project made. And at that time we had also not much knowledge data about metadata. So, because you have to be aware, this project at that time was a big project in the situation of the European Union. It was 2 million euros. But you have to know this was not the only marine project. There were several, tenfolds of projects referring to the marine environment and in the space environment. But what you see here already, 26% of the money was allocated, was used just to acquire the license data, in particular the elevation data for each country. 17% just to update the data. In some areas we had to work with data which was before the Second World War. 33% was missing data. We didn't have even from a lot of areas not hydrodynamic data. And 24% was related to format conversion, integration and control, quality control. So that means that we had higher invest costs because of this coast erosion. And on the left you see this beautiful end product that we had. But in order to achieve it, it cost quite a lot of money. And if we would have an open data policy, this could have been much cheaper, much more efficient. Also, it took us 3 years to do this project. Instead of 2 years, that was actually the timeline. But we were forced to, we needed almost 1 year longer, because we had to deal with all the licensing and the agreements, and that took time, and I was quite frustrated. Also at the end, we didn't know actually the paper on the left, what you see, how uncertain, what was the quality about it, which is quite frustrated. And at the end, we had dissemination constraints, and actually that's really what matters. You see the map, but all the data that we collected, we were not allowed to reuse it for other purposes. We were blocked because of the licensing conditions that we could not reuse the issues. So that was very, very frustrating, and also even the data set itself at the end, we were forced to lower the scale for visualization purposes because of the conditions that we assigned to. So what is open data geodata? And I'm a scientist. The terminology, I think, is the key to understand principles and defining policies. What are we talking about when we use the term open geodata? And then we see also that are all using the same term? No, that isn't the case. But let's go who different organizations think about open data. The Open Data Foundation has a very long list what data must be. Data must be complete, must be timely, must be non-discriminatory, must be license-free, etc., etc. But be simple. I think, according to my understanding, it is data without any restriction in its use and provided for free. What is open geodata? Geodata, and that I've already explained, is all the data that somehow is referring to a location on the Earth. And according to my dear colleague Roger Longhorn, he gave a very nice definition about open geodata. And that is if any user is free to use, reuse, and distribute it. I not have to explain you what geodata is. There are different types of geodata, and I will pass this to the next one. So, are there examples of applications based on open geodata? And yes, I just gave a set. And they are from the, I was given this by my dear colleague Bastiaan Verloenen, and we did some inventory of all open data applications, open geodata applications in the Netherlands. Here we see some examples. About the first one is about sharing ideas about the neighborhood. The second one is about the quality of swimming water. The third is an application based on text analysis. The next one is a very interesting one, is about where are romantic benches in the park located. The other one is about average house asking price per square meter. And all these products could have not been achieved if we had no open data policy in the Netherlands. And traffic accidents. And other examples, and just to give you a flavor of all the different applications has been achieved by opening the data in the Netherlands, are these examples. So we have also another one about playgrounds, or an application for sponsoring a nature that you like very much. And or a very interesting one is that a group of students from Delft University of Technology built quite an interesting application called Quite Fast, best wel snel. And that is about the highest speed on a specific track each moment of each day. And it's quite a popular one. And then about where if you have an open house or you would like to sell your house, then you can make use of this open data, open house application. So let's go to what are the benefits. And you see here some gigantic figures. 68 billion euros according to the PIRA international study. And that was one of the first studies who really was focusing on opening all the data. In the Netherlands, they judged or they assessed that opening data would have a benefit of 27 billion euros in 2006. And the Vickery one for the European Union, 40 billion. These are very gigantic numbers, but just showing that there is illustrating that there is an economic benefit of opening the data. This is another example from Australia. And this is really showing when you had the statistical data were charged and when they were freed. Then we see a big impact on the use, on the number of people that use the data. If opening the data, and then we have a nice example of Landsat. They used to be free. these Landsat datasets. But then there were some regulations, some rules which tried to pay something. And then we saw that from a drop from 25,000 hits downloads per year. But after, when we say no, this doesn't work, it significantly increased to 1 million downloads in 6 months when it was opened again. So we see here quite a big impact on the reuse of open data. In the Netherlands is a very nice example about the open data effect for public data on the map. K stands for kaart in the Netherlands, which is map. And here you see here, when they open the data in 2012, you see an explosion of hits of people that have downloads of this public data. And these are topographic data and land use data and all the different types of data, which seems to be very useful. But I would like to pinpoint or to highlight one important statement. Why open data? The coolest thing to do with your data will be thought of someone else. So you think that has no sense, why should I open it? But there's always someone creative in this planet. We could do something with it. We could be something innovative with these kind of things. And that is all about the opening the data. It could, besides innovation, it could also contribute to a better health care. For example, this is an example of New York. There was an application called Don't Eat At. And there you can find restaurants in New York City where it was not healthy to eat in certain locations. And even some, so that was the reason why some restaurants had to close down, because they had no clients anymore. But at the end, it had an impact on the people's hygiene. Then also about transparency, data quality and efficiency. There are in the Netherlands 2 provinces, province of Overijssel and province of Gelderland. And the province of Overijssel had a very strong open data policy and the province of Gelderland not. And this is an illustration of noise levels. And what we see afterwards, after this was presented to the decision makers of the both provinces, that the governor or the commissioner of the province of Gelderland felt totally embarrassed, and 1 week after, when this was shown, they had to open all their geospatial data. So, how to boost the value-added use? Open data. And here is also another statement of my dear friend and colleague Roger. There's not such thing as a free lunch. Someone has to pay. And this is a model which Bastiaan Verloenen developed together with his student. So when you have a government finance a public sector by opening the data. And then it goes to users. And the users could build beautiful products from it, which other users can use. Or when they add value to it, the government could benefit, of course, taxation reasons. But if there is no government, it doesn't give any funding or support or financial support to the public sector, then we have to ask ourselves, is it feasible to open the data to the users, to good quality of the users? And also, can we achieve then good new products? Can we make innovative products? And so also, can we make profit on which could be useful for taxation purposes? Therefore, this statement is a statement by Bastiaan Verloenen. It is vital for a sustainable open data business model to have a guaranteed main source of revenue, whether it be for government budget taxpayer financing or use legal instruments of levying charges for access to and use of data. So, Bastiaan's statement is, we have to look for golden eggs. And this golden eggs is called open data. They are somewhere, they are the treasure of our governments. And we would like that this, at the end, then these golden eggs burst on time, so that golden birds fly around and that everybody is happy and the governments are happy, but also our citizens are happy and our companies are happy. But When it bursts too quickly, then likely we will have not open data or not good open data, and then no golden birds will fly. Be aware of that. But we have also other challenges. But of the time perspective, I would like to mention them only by keywords. Think about liability, ownership issues, privacy, of course, a very important issue, intellectual property rights, IPR, and also competition law. There are several cases in Europe when we, as a result of open data, could we have done it or not? Because other companies, for example, set their business model because they thought that that those data would be always closed. Technology is still an issue, also in open data, and organizational issues. So, in the last 15-20 minutes, I tried to answer the following questions. Why open data? I hope that you understand now what is open geodata, and are there examples of applications based on open data. I gave you some examples just for inspiration from the Netherlands. What are the benefits of open data? They are economic but also non-economic benefits. And we showed you some business models on how to boost the value-added use of open data. With this, I would like to finalize my open data session, and I have the pleasure now to hand over my microphone to Roger.
Thank you very much, Joop. That is the end of the main presentation part of the webinar. What we would like to do now is open up the question panels to see if we have some questions arriving. Make that bigger. Okay. How can I open the panel out there? There we go. Did that show up over there? No, sorry. We're just opening up the questions panel. Again, we're struggling with the technology a little bit this morning. We'll forget about, unfortunately, someone had a sound problem, so there's not much we can do about that. Has there been any effort at looking into data harmonization with SDIs? I guess the answer is there has been considerable effort. That's really what SDIs are all about. It's the whole of the Inspire directive in the EU certainly had to do with coming up with very, very specific specifications for metadata, 34 data themes, individual data schemas, so that everyone knew exactly, and in the case of the Inspire directive and the EC regulations, by law, how they had to present the data in these themes so that it was compatible not just across government departments in their own government, but also between member states. On top of that, we had the Public Sector Information Reuse Directive, which came out before Inspire. This required all government bodies at all levels of government to make their data available to third parties for use and for reuse. It didn't have to be made available for free. This led to too many conflicts when they tried to get the regulations and the directive passed, but the data had to be made available. This was then adopted into national statute for all the member states. The original PSI reuse directive came out in 2003. It was quite limp in that it didn't tell people how they had to go about this. Then Inspire came along in 2007, which became very prescriptive. Some people feel that the Inspire directive is too prescriptive. The law itself states what attribute names have to be used in the schemas for all the different data themes. It's about 187 pages long in English. When the PSI reuse directive was amended and reissued in 2013, the main change was a requirement that the governments had to create metadata about the information assets that they hold at government level and publish this data electronically. So, and using international standards. They didn't go so far as the Inspire Directive did, stating exactly what the data should look like, but when they mention international standards for government data, that typically comes down to what used to be Dublin Core is now an ISO standard. And this is what's been adopted by most e-government initiatives, or an extension to what was the Dublin Core at the time. By harmonizing, I mean both of the spatial and feature attributes of any object. That's correct. It is also more complicated. There are technical guides on how to implement some of the features in Inspire. Individual technical guides can be 180 pages long, relating to just one theme. These relate, and they have themes relating to coordinate systems as well as the actual themes themselves. So again, it's a real learning activity. Many people in other parts of the world, I've just done 2 consulting jobs in Africa in the last year, are using Inspire as a model because so many probably thousands of years of effort went into creating these various standards, specifications, and eventually the legislation, that it's foolish to ignore it. But you then have to adapt that to the environment that you're working in, and especially when it comes to standards, you need to come up with national profiles, which is done even here in Europe. One of the other questions is, given that there are a lot of unknowns in the marine underwater environment and that marine science research is ongoing to address this, in what extent are universities contributors to marine SDI? Some of the most advanced and earliest research into coastal SDI that I know of, I'm also on the International Committee for the Coast GIS Conference Series, has come out of the universities, either in Ireland, in the UK, in Spain, in Portugal, and certainly in the US. Because a lot of the marine activity and coastal activity was really bottom-up SDI, where communities got together, realized that they had to do something for which there was no national initiative in place. Much of this was then driven by the research community. The other aspect is the very large projects that have been funded here in the European Union through the various research technology development framework programs. I'm EC reviewer right now for something called the Atlantic Ocean Observing System, Atlantos, which started 1.5 years ago. This is a 20 million euro project with 62 partners in 18 countries, including on both sides of the Atlantic, not just in Europe. Part of two of the main work packages in this 20 million euro project looks at the economic benefits, the rationale, the harmonization. They're trying to come up with agreement across the Atlantic on how to publish data to standards. And again, this leads to the added complexity where you've got European members involved who have to also follow the Inspire directive, because most of the data that they're harmonizing falls into one of the Inspire data themes. And then you have people in South Africa, Brazil, Canada, US, who don't have the requirement to meet those standards, but somehow we all need to agree standards for doing cross-Atlantic observation. The other part of the harmonization issue that's so difficult, I guess, is evidenced by the fact that the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission has had a project called the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange Project, IODE, which is advised by the Group of Experts on Marine Information Management. The IODE and the work it's been doing on harmonizing data, oceanographic data, it started in 1969, and this is now 2016, and it is still very active and very much involved in the data harmonization activities at the global level. So if you think you have problems at your national level or with your next door neighbor, your next door state, and then with an entire region like Europe or an entire basin like the Atlantic, when you take that to the global side, it gets even worse. Next question was, Do you have any estimate of use or need to use S57 data in an MSDI context? This is very hard to get type of data, and current distribution models are only meant for the SOLAS market, the safety of life at sea market, relating to navigational charts and navigation at sea, electronic navigational charts, safe navigation at sea. This is coming from Rafael Ponce from ESRI. Rafael is also a member of the International Hydrographic Organization Marine SDI Working Group. I should be asking him this question, but he's asking me. So we don't have any estimates yet. I guess the whole driving force behind coming up with the S100 framework, going back 6 or 7 years ago now when we first started that activity, was because we saw a lot of hydrographic data being collected by hydrographic survey organizations, which was then not being used for navigational charting purposes. And part of the reason for that was the S57 standard, which had existed for many, many years and was heavily implemented throughout the entire marine shipping industry, was simply not robust enough to keep this other data to a standard. This also leads to, when the S100 framework was developed, it is based on ISO standards, ISO TC211, the ISO 19XXX series of geospatial standards. Because many different themes are involved, this is why we are seeing individual standards being developed within the framework, such as 101, 102, 103, as new working groups are formed. So we hopefully will end up with a situation in, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but this is how long it takes to do these things using standards, in a decade or so, where the hydrographic offices have the ability to save and harmonize and report in a standard way much more of the data. That would be very useful in working with the coastal or marine SDI than is possible today just using S57. Anything more? If not, right, well, we could have a quick, can I bring this handouts up? I just wanted to highlight again the handouts for those that haven't downloaded these from your handout chat panel on the right-hand side. The handout number 4, which is actually the presentation in PDF format, this will also be up on our website, as will all of the other handouts. If you look at the URL at the bottom of your screen, gsdiassociation.org, you go to the projects menu and then the Marine SDI submenu. We are putting all of this information up, which will be linked from that page. And we're also, we already have on our server, but it's not linked to the page yet, we have all of the workshops that we've given in this topic going back as far as 2007. This isn't the first time we've looked at these issues, so there's a tremendous amount of data there. And all of the background documentation that we use in preparing the webinars and the workshops in the past will also be linked to from that website through our Spatial Documents Depot. Relating to the other 4 handouts, the SDI readiness checklist is to do with the whole implementation of spatial data infrastructure. It's quite long. We've used this in workshops in countries that are about to implement their SDI or in the process of implementing their SDI, and it leads you through a series of questions on just how ready are the different groups of stakeholders to participate. And this is something that goes back to the entire collaboration and cooperation issue. We have to know what people know about their ability to participate in the SDI being created. And this is one of the reasons the readiness checklist was created. The very brief Marine SDI questionnaire is, again, something that you can use in your own working groups. It's only 1 page. It basically tries to understand from people who are attending a meeting what they know about SDI and how their organization is prepared to participate in the SDI. The Data Accessibility Benchmark Self-Assessment Tool was developed by Canada, by ACZIS. We've presented this and used it at the Coast GIS conference in Cape Town in 2015 in an audience group. We're actually updating it now based on that feedback. It gives you a way to understand how your organizations and eventually your whole government on a group of organizations is ready to tackle the data accessibility issues. It's not just open data. If the world had open data everywhere and governments were ready for free, I mean, the complete open data definition is free and unrestricted use, but again, that data still has a cost and someone has to pay for it. It's very rare to find, I'd probably say it doesn't exist, any government that makes all of its data, spatial data especially, completely free. Even member states that have done a very good job at opening up a lot of their spatial data, there is always some element that isn't free, sometimes for political purposes, sometimes for financial purposes, but you have to be able to work within a mixed environment where much of the data could be and should be free and unrestricted use, but if you're a third party developing a new application, especially mobile applications, you will need access to other data that isn't necessarily free. That brings us on to an issue we're going to discuss in one of our workshops, our webinars next year. I think it's the second quarter. The first quarter. We're looking into data policy issues. One of which has to do with digital rights management. The problem I've found or the challenge in project after project after project funded by the European Union over the last 24, 25 years in the information market area is whenever you start to combine data sets from different suppliers that are made available on different terms, and again, even if 95% of it was totally free open data, the 5% you need for your application might not be totally free. You then have to enter into licensing agreements. You need some way to manage that. You need to understand what the legal rights are of your final information product. So it's never a simple issue. What we tend to find at the end of these 3- and 4-year projects is a black box up in the corner of the block diagram showing how the system will work that says DRM, Digital Rights Management, but there's never too much in it in the way of content. We have had 3 major EU-funded projects looking into the licensing and the IPR issues over the last, I guess, 7 or 8 years now, including most of the topographic mapping agencies from Eurogeographics, and we are making progress, but there is no simple answer at the moment. The final handout is the IHO's Marine SDI questionnaire. This, again, was developed by Canada, and it is being sent out to all of the hydrographic offices who are members of IHO. It was sent out initially. I think there were 20, 25 responses. We're collecting more information now. The reason I present it here is, again, to give you an idea of the sort of questions you need to be asking your stakeholders in your country to see how prepared they are to participate in a coastal marine SDI initiative. Now, did we just have another question, or did we have something? Stop a moment. All right. I was involved. No. Yes. Well, I can actually talk about Namibia since that was where I was last year, helping you do the SDI strategy for Namibia, working with the Namibia Statistics Agency. The question is, I was involved in the coastal sensitivity mapping and realized that lack of human capacity and stakeholder awareness is one of the biggest challenges. It's not only in Namibia, it's everywhere we go. It has to do with this concept, this problem or challenge of multidisciplinarity. Who manages a coastline? When you go to offshore fisheries, you have fisheries managers, you have fisheries agencies. In Canada, you have a major department for offshore fisheries. When you get to the coastline, which is one of the most complex areas to work in, I think we did a study about 4 or 5 years ago in the United Kingdom, which has a very extensive coastline, heavy population at the coastline. We never found a government official at county level, certainly not at national level, who was called a coastal zone manager. Basically, you needed groups of people to come together under some sort of guidance, under a framework, a cooperation framework to tackle these issues. The real problem on human capacity is training. It's funding for training. And again, that's not a problem just in our developing nations. It's a problem everywhere. I've worked with major counties in the UK and Ireland that have populations of 10 million people or more, certainly in the UK, well, 8 million people. They have maybe 15,000 staff in their county departments, and I meet the 1 or 2 GIS officers that they have. It's a situation that is changing it has changed over the last few years. But when you've got people that are already overworked from the technical point of view, it's more difficult for them even to be involved in the training, let alone be active trainers themselves. I guess the approach we're trying to take, and I've seen this in other programs, is to train the trainers. So we bring a group of people together. This is part of how the Ocean Teacher Academy works at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission office in Ostende, Belgium. We bring people in from maybe 10 or 15 countries. They spend 4 to 5 days learning on specific topics, for example, putting up web services, creating harmonized data, interoperability issues, even some of the legal aspects, and then they go back to their home countries and start training up other people. I don't see any other way to do this cost efficiently. Let me see if we have any new. No. Okay. So we're 5 minutes from the end of our scheduled time. What I did want to say, if we don't have any more questions arriving in the next 5 minutes, comment on Professor Crumford's presentation on open data. There are several recent studies, recent being within the last 3 to 4 years, on the value of opening up government data. This has been one of the big drivers, certainly in Europe and in many other countries as well, as to why government data, once it's made freely available and with as few restrictions on use as possible, is actually a very strong driver for the economy. Government departments have legal mandates to do jobs. They're called the public task. And a government department needs to collect information to do its public task. It also then collects a lot of other information. Some of this information may be actually enshrined in law. You're legally required to keep information on where the national monuments in a state are located and their condition, for example, from my own experience. The department responsible for that may have 5 or 6 other data sets they use for purely operational purposes. These are not necessarily mandated by law, but they're valuable sources of geospatial information for the economy. When this information is made more widely available, hundreds of other people, and I say hundreds, even in a certain application area, then have the possibility to start creating new applications that, first of all, are not in the legal remit of the public body to create anyway. It's not part of their job, and they don't have the resources for it. But secondly, they probably also don't have the capacity, or in some cases even the latest technology experience to do that. And therefore, by opening up this data, the studies that have been done most recently in countries like the UK, like Denmark, I think we have 2 from the US, have shown tremendous positive benefits to the economy as a whole, the information economy, when government data is made more openly available. That does not solve the problem or the challenge of who has to pay for collecting, maintaining the custodianship for that data. This has to be done at government policy level. In countries where the national policy is still not to make data that widely open, where they still wish to charge for data as a way to help cover some of the cost of running the department, all you can do is try to encourage those people to open up more of their data and then show why that makes a benefit, why that benefits the whole of society. Even though it may, in some cases, lead to added cost in the government department itself. This gets down to case studies, cost-benefit analyses on individual cases, individual applications. It's a never-ending job, because until we have convinced more people who control the financial strings that the data can be made openly available and it will benefit everyone, it's a strong uphill struggle. Would you like to say anything more on that? Nope. Another problem is integration, interorganization relations. Again, a good question. Each organization or department has their own projects based on their own activities. They have their own knowledge about their data. They have their own attitudes toward sharing data. Unless there is a government policy in place that requires them to do that, how do you overcome this? With great difficulty. In fact, such difficulty, this is what led in 2003 to the Public Sector Information Reuse Directive in the European Union, which at that time, when we started on this directive in 1998, I think we only had 15 member states, and now there are 28. And even when the directive was passed and all the member states finally adopted it in national statutes, statutory instruments, or national laws, it still didn't lead to any great growth in the use of the public sector information, but at least then a third party or another government department, a third party can be anyone other than the custodian of the data itself. So it started off where one government department could now legally ask for data from another government department, and they had to provide it to them. It didn't have to be done for free, but they had to make the data available. And more importantly, the data had to be made available to people completely outside of government. Third party meant anyone else, so that the commercial sector could become involved in using that data to build new products and services and helping increase the size of the economy generally. I'm sorry, there is no easy answer to that. The countries I've worked with, the key is trying to get people to understand the value of sharing their data. Forget about whether it's open to anyone else at the moment. Just cross governments within governments is key. If this can't be achieved, I know of at least 2 national initiatives that started more than 6 years ago that spent the next 3 years after their regulations were put in place simply trying to resolve the interorganizational issues, the challenges, beginning with the simplest one, who should be in charge, which actually led to changes at cabinet level in these governments. These are organizational issues. These have to do with organizational psychology. They have very little to do with geospatial information. Okay, let's see, we have 2 more minutes left. Let me see if we have any more questions that have come in. They're not arriving in sequence. Sorry. I think that's all of it for now. Okay, if any questions haven't been answered, hang on, here's one of the small island states. All right, I'm afraid I can't answer the question on small island states. I would have to look into that. I used to be involved with the UN body looking after small island states, but that was some years ago. We do have studies coming from universities in places like the Canary Islands, and there was a recent one I also saw from Bermuda. There was some research done in Jamaica. I will try to locate those studies and get back to Kevin with that. And what we would like to do is reply to all of these questions in writing back to everyone who attended the seminar, the webinar. I think that's it, and we're now at the end of our allocated 90 minutes. So thank you to everyone who attended. I'm sorry if we had a couple of technical glitches here. This is the first time we've used this system to run the webinar. We've learned a lot, and I will say that beginning in January, we'll be running another series of webinars relating to the Marine SDI research project that we're doing. The first to be held sometime in Q1, we're probably looking at February, has to do with data policy issues, the intellectual property rights, licensing, access, use, reuse of data, and how these challenges for the marine community fit within the NSDIs. And what we're trying to do for the future case studies is build these future webinars, is bring in more real live case studies. This first webinar was basically an introduction to the challenges that we've seen out there and a report on the research that we've done specifically on geoportals. But we want to extend that. The second quarter webinar will be an extension on the geoportal good practice that Jade introduced today, looking at advances on the standards activities. We'd like to report on the Open Geospatial Consortium has just created a marine thematic working group, domain working group. within the last month or two. We're going to see, we have their charter, we're going to see how the work develops on that. Some of us are members of that working group as well. We'd also like to be able to demonstrate some of the tools that are available for working with geoportals. And more issues on creating harmonized data, especially metadata. If you don't have metadata describing your resources, the information assets that you hold, and if these are not published, then nobody else knows how to get at the data they might find useful. The third quarter, we're looking at focusing more on the big data challenges. And in the marine world, these are serious challenges. Big data, you cannot handle big data the same way you are used to handling databases. The European Union is running about €150 million research initiative right now focusing on big data, coming up with entire new sets of tools. The paybacks are huge. The National Science Foundation in America is working on this. They're actually creating, in Europe, there's a proposal forward to create a new university-level degree called Big Data Scientist, because when you start working with data sets that have petabytes and zettabytes in them, everything you might have known about SQL and your standard database goes out the window. Unfortunately, in the marine community, because we have access to space-based information, the satellite imagery coming in, the deep ocean data being collected by floating Argos floats, the data being collected on land, the data being collected by ships, it is a serious big data challenge as to how we're actually going to use this most efficiently. So that's going to be the focus of our webinar in quarter 3. In quarter 4, I'm not sure we've agreed yet what we're going to do on that, so there'll be more news coming along. So with that, I'd like to close the webinar. Thank everyone who attended. We will post the recording up, a link to the recording on our website. We'll have the rest of the documentation that was used behind this on the website by Monday morning. It's going to be a long weekend for some of us. Looking at Joop and Jade, I guess that's me. Thank you all for attending. I'm now going to close the workshop.